Okay, well, welcome to Patio Perspectives, our monthly web podcast, where we interview thought leaders on the latest in event sustainability and just sustainability in general. I'm your host, Paul Salinger. You know, sometimes it's counterintuitive to go simpler. What if you could just get in, get out, get to 90%, don't worry about perfection? I think we oftentimes, as event people, are looking for perfection. How can we have the biggest impact with the lowest effect? MeetGreen has been dealing with these issues for well over 20 years. I've personally been friends with and working with the folks at MeetGreen since 2007. They are one of the leading event agencies focused on sustainable events. So it's a real pleasure today to be talking to two individuals that are driving sustainability for MeetGreen and for MeetGreen's clients, Eric Wallinger and Aaron Elliott. Eric and Aaron, welcome to Patio Perspectives. So I'm going to let you both introduce yourselves, and then we will jump into the conversation. Eric, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Yeah, hello, Paul. Thank you for having us. I am Director of Sustainability at MeetGreen, and I've been here for 8 years now. And I've gotten to work with you, Paul, in person in 2018 and 2019. For Oracle Open World. And, I think one of my favorite parts of sustainable events is being on site and trying to execute with the teams. And so I think that's given me, and I'm sure Aaron feels this way as well, it's an interesting perspective of kind of being on those front lines, being on the waste dock, kind of being in the mix. So excited to talk about this over the next hour.
Yeah, for sure. Aaron.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. My name's Aaron Elliott. Been working in the sustainability world for almost 20 years now, which is pretty wild. Started in the environmental policy world, went to the environmental science world more with beakers and studies and things, and then I've been working with MeetGreen for the last 10 years now. And I had the pleasure right when I started MeetGreen going down to San Francisco and meeting you, Paul, at Oracle. That was my first ever event, and I couldn't believe how big events could be at that point. So it's really looking back on that, I've learned a lot. So I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it was great working with both of you. I worked with Shauna McKinley for a number of years before you came on, Aaron, and then Eric kind of came on after that. So as I said, I've been working with MeetGreen for quite a long time. So let's just jump into this conversation. A couple of years ago, Society for Sustainable Events ran a series of events that looked into how we're dealing with carbon, waste, and supply chain, sort of three really big topics, that we have to address. These topics still seem top of mind when it comes to the event sustainability conversation. What are you both seeing in terms of progress or change, and how are your clients dealing with these issues?
Yeah, I can jump in, Paul.
Sure.
I do think these are the key kind of tentpole questions. It's like body, mind, and spirit. It just never gets old. They are just key questions that we continue to wrangle with, and so I think they're still relevant. And what we're seeing in terms of carbon is that proximity where your event's located plays a really big role. And Aaron, when I'm done speaking, maybe you want to riff on that too. But I can just tell you that compared to carbon footprint for an event last year and compared it to its data from the year before, and the change of location in just raw travel, that reduced by 35%. We had a 35% reduction in emissions. On-site emissions went up slightly, but that was a huge decarbonization piece. And I'm led to believe that it was the choice of location. So Aaron and I sometimes joke that the greenest event is the one that you're closest to. Right. It sounds almost absurd to say, but it's that important. So maybe Nashville as an events hub needs to keep growing, or those kind of Midwest event centers. Waste, we're navigating a lot of changes in guidance. I can tell you in 2024 in Las Vegas, a lot has changed, and you think it wouldn't. You think it'd be a well-oiled machine, and it is. But what's accepted continues to change. They have the first plastics polymer center in the nation. Another one's being built in Arizona. So what's feeding into that system is different than it was in 2023, among other things. Compost has certainly changed since our days of working together.
Right.
National guidance has really rippled across the nation due to PFAS and that sort of thing. And supply chain, in some ways, that's the most slippery one.
Right.
To influence, probably because there's a lot of dollars at stake there. But the one nugget of advice I might say is get your food and beverage teams involved on day one. They really intersect in high volumes with your supply chain, obviously graphics as well. But like literally when the project kicks off, I'm trying to get meal guarantees and track down the F&B teams because I think it's going to move the needle if we can engage them quicker.
Yeah.
Because of the supply chain ripples.
So just before Aaron jumps in, a quick question about supply chain. So, a topic that seems to be coming up a lot is the whole idea of ethical procurement, which obviously touches supply chains. So I am sort of wondering, whether some of your clients are looking at procurement from a different perspective and looking at, kind of ethical procurement, whether it's food and beverage or whether it's giveaways or anything within the supply chain where they are procuring things that might have to travel from different countries, might be from countries that maybe are, not ethically producing things. I'm curious as to kind of what the shift might be, when it comes to ethical procurement.
Yeah, do you want to jump in on there?
For sure. Yeah. I think a lot of the ethical procurement, at least from the clients that I'm working with, has to do with anything that they purchase on like swag, for instance. Like clothing is a huge one. Of course, it's very well known that a lot of places that we get our clothing are not ethically sourced, even if they claim to be. So more locally sourced materials that way, and also just food and beverage. And there's just so many trickle down impacts of the type based on the type of food and beverage that you provide. Locally sourced food, of course, just knowing where it's being produced, but even in the United States, it could not be as ethically produced, unfortunately. So just knowing how, for instance, the more meat heavy your menu is, the more water that's being used, which of course has that trickle down impact on the folks that need water in various different locations. So really thinking about the things that make the lowest environmental impact typically lead to more ethically purchased products. So that's more kind of like the holistic view that I've seen from the clients that I've been working with.
Yeah, and are you seeing that brands in particular are looking at it from that perspective, that their procurement departments are actually sort of taking ethical and sustainable procurement into, kind of a value system, if you will, as opposed to just going for the cheapest price on everything?
That's certainly the goal, and it depends on what materials you are purchasing and who you're working with and that sort of thing. But it certainly is kind of a general directive that is over most of the procurement, especially when it comes to, again, food and materials that you're purchasing kind of on top of the build materials and things that you're using at the event. I haven't gotten too far into, booth builds and that sort of thing from like a contractor level for their procurement.
Right. Was there more that you wanted to add on the question around carbon and waste and whatnot?
For sure. Yeah. I think the biggest shift that I've seen, and I think Eric, you and I both saw it very similarly, is when the pandemic hit, there was a huge shift from waste to carbon. And just thinking of things in terms of their carbon impacts, I think part of that is because events went virtual. So by nature, as Eric was mentioning, the carbon footprint went down. There wasn't any travel, that sort of thing. People were doing things virtually as we are today. So that was a really positive story to tell. But even with that, it got a little bit more in depth as to what the upstream impacts, the kind of cradle to grave impacts are of different material use. So should we use metal versus wood? Should we use compostable serviceware or plastic serviceware? What's the upstream impact of that? Not even thinking about what the disposal of that sort of material is. And it's really like kind of transitioned into a carbon focus even after, folks started going in person and those sorts of things. So that tends to be what lens we look at things through. The beauty of sustainable actions is, almost always they all point in the same direction. So if you reduce your energy use, you're reducing your carbon use. If you're reducing your material use, you're reducing your carbon use, right? So it kind of all rows in the same direction. So in a lot of ways, regardless of how we're telling the story, we're still seeing those reductions in all kind of four main categories: the carbon, energy, water, and waste.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that point a little bit, because I think when people think about decarbonizing, they think primarily about travel to some degree. Sure. And to your point, I think there's a lot more that we could do in terms of working, like, for example, with design teams on what materials they're picking and choosing low carbon options as a way of mitigating carbon beyond just attendee travel.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about things in terms of reduction as well. I mean, the most sustainable material you can use isn't like an alternative product. It's not using that in the first place. So so really thinking about, and of course that's a money, a cost story as well, cost saving story, which usually works in the benefit of making that decision for you. So
yeah. And just coming back to the comment on, choosing venues in terms of carbon, is there any consideration you think being taken at this point in choosing venues, given the circumstances around climate change, with like the wildfires that are going on in Canada and the Pacific Northwest and California, and even in parts of Europe, and and water issues in areas like Phoenix, which are on the verge of drought, and the East Coast with flooding and hurricanes? I mean, do you feel like people are like starting to look at destinations like, where is actually a safe destination that we could go, that maybe it could be a low carbon option because of travel, and should we take these risk factors into account when we're choosing our venues?
I would say yes. I think there's room to grow here. On the sustainability side, on the carbon side of things, our kind of highest performing clients at MeetGreen do ask a series of questions, years in advance when they're site selecting, when they're weighing options.
Yeah.
So they're thinking about this. They're looking at the regional averages for a room night. It may not be the ultimate driver of the decision, but at least they have that channel available to them. And so I think that's pointing the way for where this could go, is that if everybody added that as at least a line item of consideration, I think we'd come out ahead. From the actual like traditional risk management side of things, like natural disasters, I know it's all connected, but the conference management portion of MeetGreen, it's something that they talk about a lot. And again, it's ultimately at the client's direction. In our role, we can ask questions and so forth. Yes, MeetGreen is actually, as a professional development option, met with a risk management expert, sort of shared stories and that sort of thing. So it's something we're talking about, but it seems like there's, again, more room there's room to grow here.
Yeah, no doubt that there are huge dollars involved. I mean, all these cities that have, CVBs or destination, travel organizations, they're all vying for the same dollars. And so, it's just an interesting question to wonder whether some of those destinations are even looking at this risk factor and trying to figure out what they can do to help event people and help event planners to come to their city safely. So,
yeah, one thing that I've seen advertised a lot in the destination selection process. Like Eric said, everything's connected, of course, and then the more carbon we use, the more risk we have over time. But renewable energy use from a city or from a venue itself, I think is something that is touted above many other things that seemingly at least 10 years ago would have been more important or higher on the list. But that renewable energy use, lower carbon footprint, just inherently by being there, I think is one of those things that folks point out.
Yeah. Yeah, that interdependency is a great point, and it leads into the sort of this next question, because we all know that sustainability can be really complicated the more you dive into it. There's so much interdependency between the various components of it. Are we overcomplicating it? How could we simplify things so that we make it easier to adopt sustainable practices?
You think, Aaron?
Yeah, for sure. I have a lot of thoughts on this actually, so this is great.
Right.
Um, I think that at least when we start talking to clients or working with clients, I think there's a tendency to compare, or at least folks are inspired by other events that have maybe 10 years of data, and they've had 10 years to not just collect the data, but also
Right.
dig in pretty deep on a lot of different topics. And it
Sure.
feels like that's a place to start for a lot of folks. So I think it does kind of inherently lead to a higher expectation, I suppose, of how you're going to be able to start. What are the things that you're going to start focusing on?
Right.
And we at MeetGreen, working with both clients that we work with specifically, and also folks that come to us that might just might be a little bit too small or not have the funding to work with a dedicated sustainability consultant. Our advice is a lot of times, what's the most important thing to you, and where can we start implementing something that's going to have a high impact and fairly low effort on your part. So that's really what we're trying to identify. Things like, how can you make your menu a little bit less carbon intensive, plant forward menu type of a thing. How can you look at your ordering history to reduce food waste at the end of your event, which will obviously be a cost savings as well. What sort of serviceware do you use? Maybe that's a focus, not just what you use, but what's the end of life for it if it's disposable. Can we switch to more rentals? So some of the things are fairly straightforward.
Right.
That it feels like you're not looking at the peripheries.
Right.
But you're just kind of waiting to look at the peripheries until you have the bandwidth, or you take care of the things that should be in your main focus. Is kind of how we look at it. So you can have a 5-list, a 5-item checklist. Check off those things in the first year. They might be fairly straightforward, but they do have a really big impact, and then build on that over time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think that we've sort of hopefully moved beyond kind of just doing the really basic things that are so easy to do, like stopping printing and eliminating bottled water. And to your point, trying to focus on things that are achievable, but actually do have, a good impact, so that you can actually feel good about, kind of what you're doing, and can then take that and continuously improve from year to year.
Yeah, and I'm not taking the importance away of reducing paper printing and reducing waste in certain. I always look at it as like the light bulb tier. Like if you're down to changing the light bulbs from incandescent to LEDs, which is something that's probably naturally going to happen anyway now that they're cost effective, et cetera. Then first of all, you might already be pretty far along. So there's that. But also you might be, not focusing on some of the things that'll make a much bigger impact.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think I always, when I talk to people still now, and I'm talking to people all the time, I'm still getting that question of like, where do we start?
Totally.
And I think your answer there is a good way of thinking about it, in terms of like, okay, well, where would you like to start? What are you actually trying to achieve? Eric, you want to add anything into this?
Yes, and I feel in full agreement with Aaron as well. It's in sustainability, like if you are able to really get in the weeds with your team and are really able to raise that bar and it's working, then by all means keep doing that. That's where we want to go.
For sure.
I've noticed the phenomenon among sustainability professionals and those working in sustainability. I think those of us on this call can relate, but it's a feeling of maybe something not being rigorous enough. I've seen it so much, and I felt like I guess this is my second year at MeetGreen, I developed a client playbook, and I was really nervous that it wasn't going to be rigorous enough. I wanted this to really be like no one could say that we were coming in light. and I feel like it's gathering dust on the shelf somewhere.
Right.
And I sort of realized that shock and awe and that sort of side of things has some drawbacks too. So if it's working for you, by all means, keep growing it because we want to raise the bar. But if
Right.
it's not, I mean, Aaron and I both play music on the side, and we've kind of found as we've gotten older and played more music, sometimes the simplest songs, focusing on the fundamentals and just
Mm.
like that's where a lot of it's at. And
Yeah.
so don't let all the grandiose targets and so forth that you're hearing out there fool you. They're important, but every step is important in just action, just engaging your team, doing something. So I'm
Yeah.
in favor of simplifying at this point.
Yeah. I
If you
mean,
want to go industry wide.
I think for people like us, who've been doing it for a long time, we do get frustrated that people are still asking the kind of the basic questions, and we want people to be more ambitious. But I completely get your point that there are still people out there that have not even started and that and are maybe just doing very basic things. And so trying to just help them get on the path and get into the journey in some way, and not to worry too much about, as we said, perfection, but just getting to as high a level as they can get to and then keep working at it from year to year, I think is really a smart way of looking at it.
Yeah, thinking about if you search on Google and just say, how do you run a sustainable event? The person that writes the article that you read is
Mm-hmm.
typically a sustainability professional, or the person that's quoted in there is a sustainability professional.
Sure.
They're going to be looking at it from their lens, as opposed to the lens of somebody who has four other hats that they're wearing. They're doing registration,
That's right.
they're contacting speakers, et cetera, et cetera. They don't have the bandwidth, and to make it overcomplicated just means they might do less next year, right? Like they might say this wasn't all that successful potentially, or it took up too much of my time.
Right.
It's not sustainable for me as a human,
Right.
and it will have knock-on effects year after year that it'll have less of an impact over time.
For sure. For sure. So just a quick follow-up question. So, you mentioned, Aaron, that there are
Mhm.
clients that are, potentially just too small. They don't have the funding to hire, a dedicated consultant like a MeetGreen.
Mhm.
But MeetGreen has a ton of resources like on your website and whatnot. Are there things that people can go to the website and get basically for free, just so that they can at least, even if it's just a conversation with you guys and some free resources to just get them started, so that maybe down the road they, can develop the funding to bring in a MeetGreen or a consultant that they may choose?
Absolutely. There's a wealth of information. We do a choose a website a week, or choose a page on the website a week. So it's constantly kind of updating over time, and over the last, decade plus, the resources have just kind of compounded. We have a sustainable events kit, which is a
Right.
fairly nominal fee and has a lot of information in there, of course, that you can purchase from MeetGreen. But there's also a lot of infographics, like what are the 10 things that you can do that'll start you on the sustainability path. What are good menu choices you can choose for your event, and then we also have some calculators that are out there for free that look at virtual event footprints and food menu footprints and various other things. So yeah, a lot of resources on MeetGreen, and really we're very proud of the fact that if you search in Google the phrase like sustainable events, MeetGreen website will certainly come up. So it shouldn't be hard to find.
Aaron's
On your
point was just looking up eventfoodcarboncalculator.com. Eventfoodcarboncalculator.com is free. And it's a great place, for example, if you're trying to benchmark a menu that you're considering. And so I actually used that for IMX Frankfurt this year for our gala dinner. And so that formed the basis of coming out with estimates that we publicly shared for guests who were choosing a vegetarian or non-vegetarian option. Actually, it was a vegan option or a chicken and fish option. We also just published a back of house tour checklist. Speaking of getting back to the fundamentals, never gets old. Seriously, as I would say, if you do one thing when you're on site, is take a back of house tour. Everybody should do it. It will help them just seeing the way that your waste is handled, seeing what's going on in the kitchens, it's going to increase your buy-in in the program.
And you're muted, Paul.
Sorry about that.
Oh, you're all good.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. And no, and as you know, Eric, we used to do behind the scenes, tours for local event people at Oracle Open World, and we've been doing them at SFSE for the last year or so at different events and at different venues, and they're always incredibly popular. And I think that people get a lot out of them when they can actually see kind of sustainability in action, if you will.
Yep.
So
I agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I think that's one thing that you really left a legacy around, was that transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Your work at Oracle was always sort of open, and like, I think that you showed like the successes and the opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
and the works in progress, and I think that that's just really valuable, giving stakeholders that insight, the ultimate credibility.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're going to all be sort of advocates and educators around sustainability, I think we have to have that transparency. So you mentioned a specific tool for measurement, and I want to dig into that a little bit. So when it comes to measurement, which I think we all agree is incredibly important, there are so many more tools on the market now, some of them very comprehensive. Does this make it any easier or just make it more daunting for event planners and suppliers to get the data they need to make smart decisions? And how would you advise people to approach measurement?
Anyone jump in there?
Sure. Yeah. Just a few thoughts in that. I think more tools is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, Aaron and I have sort of felt like we were in the Wild West for so long. It's nice to see options there. But I want to flag something that, at least from my perspective, that events are a little bit different than traditional corporate sustainability. And in my opinion, one of the reasons is that in traditional corporate sustainability, there is a owned asset, a corporate headquarters. There might be multiple buildings and so forth, but there's an ownership there and sort of a longer term piece. For an event, your event might be happening for 1 week a year,
right?
And you don't own it. It's a sort of this gray area. And so events are in the emissions category we call scope 3.
Right.
You have an event, it's in your scope 3 emissions. And so you've got that. And so let's say your team has 1,000 events, and many do. And so just the corporate team that has sort of a static asset that is owned, and we're like can really use a different kind of tool in a different kind of way that makes sense for them.
Yeah.
And so really high performing events, and maybe like an IMX America Frankfurt, where it's 2 events produced in a location, you can go deeper. It's more feasible to do that.
That's right.
But if you've got a mobile bunch of events, maybe your flagship events you'll want to dive really deep into, but you want to report at some level for others. So it's going to be a little bit quicker. Maybe you don't need to have a sustainability consultant for that. And so just wanted to kind of flag that there's not a one size fits all scenario. And so that's a good thing about these tools. And so depending where you're at in your program and so forth might drive what you need. But if we want everybody to report, it can only be as strong as the weakest link. And so I am in favor, kind of back to our little theme of like maybe simplifying and trying to bring everybody along.
Yeah.
So
does that mean that people could literally, if they wanted to, if they could figure it out, use an Excel spreadsheet to measure?
Yes. A lot of the tools that you see are sort of a coded graphic overlay of an Excel spreadsheet. The same emissions factor and equation is happening underneath the hood. The dashboard features are really helpful. If there's storage there, that can get a little wonky where you have all these columns, but it's essentially a very high functioning Excel spreadsheet. And
Yeah.
Aaron on our team is one of our, real thought leaders in terms of emissions. I turn to him, sort of weekly or monthly with different questions. As I'm curious, what do you think, Aaron, on this?
Right.
I think that it follows somewhat the same path as the previous question in starting has it become too complicated, essentially, which I think measurement is obviously extremely important. You can't manage what you don't measure type of a
Right.
thing.
Sure.
And I think that the comprehensive tools that are out there, if you can get past the fact that they're very daunting initially
Yeah.
and take pieces of it out that are meaningful for you, I
Right.
think they can be really, really useful because they do a lot of auto calculations for you and do, in some cases, some of the storytelling around it, which is really nice. But again, you have to get over that initial daunting phase of it. Luckily, I mean, what we find, especially when we're working with maybe like a lot of different smaller events, some of the data that tells the sustainability story is already being tracked. It's just not being tracked in like a sustainability format or in a way that you can tell that story.
Right.
So food and beverage is a very easy one. I think to get, what the guarantees are because you purchase the meals, right? So you just have to find out who to ask. Things like trucking, freighting, that sort of thing, you're paying per mile or you're paying per gallon of fuel burned, that sort of thing. That's already being tracked. A lot of things that you're purchasing are already being tracked. So I think starting out with what you already have and trying to find out where you can get that information is the most useful, and then figuring out what tools you can use, how that information can be useful to you. And oftentimes, if we're talking about the food and beverage piece, a lot of it is like being tracked, not just for sustainability purposes, but waste equals money as well, and thinking about it in a cost savings way as well over time. I think is helpful.
Yeah, and I think I'm asking the question around whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or some simple tool. Is people often have an issue with the cost of these tools as well, right?
Sure.
It's not cheap to use Trace or some of the other, like you say, comprehensive tools that are come on the market, or even the MeetGreen calculator for that matter. I know, you guys charge for it as well. So, yeah. So I think, the advice for people if they're just getting started is to at least try to measure things, even if it's as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. But yeah, there are great tools out there. They should, try to look for them, and if they can use them, fantastic. But we also mentioned reporting, and I think to your point, one of the things that I'm really proud of from my Oracle days was the fact that we wrote a report. You guys helped us write a report for virtually every open world from 2007 on. And to your point, we tried to share those as publicly as we possibly could, both on the Oracle website, on the Oracle event website, on your MeetGreen website, and just getting it out there so that people could learn from each other. And that was always our intent, is to help people learn what we were doing that worked or didn't work, and try and take on some of these things on their own. And so I'm curious as to whether you're seeing an uptick in people reporting and whether that's going well, and are people sharing that information, or are we still, I know a lot of brands have a lot of rules around what they can say publicly or not publicly. And so I'm just sort of interested in kind of where we stand at this point in terms of tools, or not tools, but reporting.
We have seen an uptick in our clients reporting, which is great. The one not so great thing from a sharing of knowledge perspective is that we've taken a step back in terms of public disclosure. I suppose it's understandable from the brand perspective, accusations of greenwashing and so forth. I'm so connected to events.
Yeah.
I mean, I innately think, well, events are different. It's so hard to get teams that aren't budgeted for this to do anything.
Right.
And the fact that we did this, we needed to celebrate it. And so it's a shame in that regard, because I do think it's slightly different. I wish we could put some kind of universal caveat that, like, this is a good faith report. These were our methods of verification, and sort of just couch it all
It's almost
take it
like
down a notch.
it's almost like you need that kind of boilerplate that brand that, you know, big companies use when they do their, you know, quarterly earnings calls of like, you know, there are risks involved, blah, 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 blah. There's some legalese that they always use. It feels like, you know, somebody could come up with a boilerplate kind of legal terminology around, you know, event reporting of sustainable practices, in terms of, you know, what they're measuring, and that, you know, this is how we did the verification. It's not always going to be 100% right, but this is as close as we can get, you know, to avoid that issue of greenwashing.
Exactly.
Yeah, to that end, and Eric has a lot of experience with this as well. We've seen definitely an uptick in the I don't know, use of the legal department, I suppose, in all public messaging.
Right.
So that is kind of, I guess, you know, like that trickles down to everything else we're trying to report out as well. Even if it's a message on a sign at an event, it still
Right.
goes through the legal department,
Right.
to make sure that it aligns with corporate goals, et cetera, et cetera. So that makes it a little bit more difficult if just that message is being vetted so much that then of course a full report is going to be that plus.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of interesting to me that a lot of brands put, you know, kind of like language on their websites around sustainability and whatnot,
Yep.
without really any kind of backup necessarily on what they're actually doing. But then when it comes to their event people wanting to report what they're doing, all of a sudden, you know, it's like, oh, no, we can't say those things.
Yep.
So
yeah, and it's strange because it's good news a lot of times too,
yeah,
right? I mean,
exactly.
we want to shout from the
Exactly.
mountaintops about the good things, and then of course the couple things that we could do better. But
That's right.
One
So
workaround, Paul, I'll just
yeah.
dive in, is if there is that layer of scrutiny and auditing and so forth, it is possible to produce sort of an attractive infographic. We've all sort of seen them, and they have sort of five, like a image and a stat.
Right.
And that way, like if you're reporting your diversion rate, you literally can link to where if you got an email from the venue or a commodity report from their environmental management system, you know, and it's doable to justify, you know, 5 data points.
Yeah,
and so it's still possible to get through this.
Yeah.
But the days of the large sustainability reports getting out there have taken a bit of a hit. IMEX is still doing a great job of sharing their results, but from corporate clients, yeah, we've seen more infographics making it through the vetting system.
Yeah, no, I would agree that, you know, infographics is a good workaround, and you know, it just feels to me like, you know, if we can get people to, whether it's an infographic or whether it's, you know, some kind of a published story that just has at least, you know, some results, that people can pick up on and say, oh, I saw that Salesforce did this, or Oracle did this, or Workday did this. That sounds like a cool idea. Maybe I should try and start to do that, rather than always having to start from scratch and always having to kind of reinvent the wheel as you go along. So one of the things that we continue to hear is the question about making the case for sustainability at events in a budget-constrained environment. Who do event planners need to talk to, and how should they frame their case to bring sustainability into things like contract negotiations, RFPs, procurement, stakeholder engagement? Do even sustainability directors inside companies understand events enough to help?
Yeah, I'll start out with that. Yeah, I'll start with the last point first, and then give a couple of things in the body of that question as well.
Right.
Eric mentioned a little bit, but events are really unique, and sometimes when we work with sustainability directors of an entire company, entire corporation, the majority of their impact really does come from the headquarters and the flying of their folks to things that aren't events, for instance, or things corporate events at the headquarters, those sorts of things, and they don't trickle down to events. I think one thing that we do often is we, or at least I, interface with sustainability directors most when we're doing the post-event reporting and going through the post-event reporting, because they're really interested in the results of that. But thinking about things in terms of what can we do to reduce the impact of this event? They oftentimes have kind of the corporate hat on as opposed to like an event specific hat on. So that can get a little bit difficult. But it's really nice, especially when we go through the results, especially if they're positive and have some pretty, you know, easily seen, I suppose, ways forward. Then that buy-in can happen, and we can get on board with more of the contract negotiations, RFPs, get things a little bit earlier on. Some of the things that are difficult for us, I think, at this level where we have very large 10,000 plus person events, is contracts happen before MeetGreen is involved.
Right.
So a lot of times we say, oh, we should have done this. This would have been really nice to do it. That's oftentimes the case, unfortunately, but sometimes, especially for long-term clients and folks that stay in the same venues year over year, you see the problem first. You have a year, maybe even 2 years of the contract already done, and you see the problem for 2 years, and then you can start getting into it.
Right.
The place that we're seeing really the contract language, RFPs, site selection piece of this is with smaller events, is with our conference management team, for instance. They put a lot of stipulations around some around reporting, but a lot around F&B and just making sure that folks are wasting as little as possible in the serviceware, and even all the way down to bulk condiments and things like that, that oftentimes make it into those contracts, and caterers are pretty amenable to those sorts of things too.
Yeah. Do you feel like venues and destinations are starting to get more tuned in to these kind of things, and sort of whether they're expecting it in the contracts and the RFPs, or whether they are already starting to put some of these practices in place anyway, so that when people ask these questions or want to put the language in contracts, the foundation is kind of already there, and it's not like a big negotiating, headache.
Yeah, I just want to mention really quick that I thought about this when we were chatting right before this, but GMIC had I think the best kind of tagline a while back, and it was ask for it. I think a really big way to affect change is to ask for sustainable, even if you don't get what you ask for, even if you don't get the data you're asking for. There's a tendency for folks like ops directors and folks to be like, oh, we've been hearing a lot about this. Maybe we should make this move. So I wanted to put that quick plug in, that even if you don't think that you're going to be able to get it, or you won't know what to do with it if you do get some of this data, asking for it is really powerful. But I also want to mention one other thing directly to your question, which is we've seen, I suppose, fortunately, unfortunately, you can make the decision that that sustainability is becoming somewhat of a revenue source, or it's seen as a revenue source. And we've gone to places that it's not already explicitly in the contract or RFPs, and asked for things like reusable serviceware, and that's had a huge upcharge, and that's been part of their offerings, is we can offer this, but it is going to be kind of a set upcharge. We already have it in our kind of sustainability rollout or program. Is that what you're going to say, Eric?
It is exactly what I was going to say. There's a strange feeling because this is happening in real time. Like, I think right before we got on the call with you, Paul, I was sharing something with Aaron on this topic. But there's been an element of like getting us hooked on a thing we like, and then suddenly, the compostable cups are $60,000 or something. It's and so in that way, I do think we're sort of teetering at a few places with possibly going backwards because of the onus of a revenue stream. But I guess, it's certainly probably understandable from a venue side. They're tasked with making money, but it's caught us off guard, I think, in 23 and 24 to the degree to which it's happening.
Yeah.
Not so different from what's happening just with inflationary prices from all kinds of different sectors.
Yeah, we had so many years of being that cool niche add-on type of a thing that we could come in and make some changes, but it didn't already have like kind of a set known revenue source.
So it seems like a value add for going somewhere.
Yeah. So given that, that seems like it makes it even that much harder for event planners to make a sustainability case or a business case for sustainability. Is there anything that you guys could, advise people in terms of like, is it just coming down to a matter of negotiation? And, how should they think about, addressing, their senior executives, for example, and saying, hey, we want to do this sustainability stuff, but it's going to cost X amount more. But here's the reason why we want to do it anyway.
Well, to that point, Paul, we do have, I mean, there's one client that I work very closely with that has, adopted sort of a set of asks at the time of contracting, and it does make it so much easier. I mean, maybe those costs are reapportioned in other places, like
Right.
they don't actually go away, but they don't jump out from a sustainability standpoint, which I think is really important because no one wants to see thousands and thousands of dollars jump out in the sustainability budget. It's too emerging of a space.
That's right.
Food and beverage people are used to big numbers, so that can squirt back out somewhere else. But
Right.
we have found success in there. So if you can do that and get out ahead, get 10 asks in your addendum. It doesn't have to be legal language. The powers that be will work this out, but I've seen it work. But another, just a possible myth to bust. Another client was working on their report. They are using about 50% less carpet and 40% decals. We've worked with them for 2022, 2023, and now 2024. And so comparing against 2022, that's significant savings. So imagine at one of the largest rooms in America, we're talking thousands and thousands of square feet of carpet, not purchased, or rented, not installed, not pulled back. I don't have insight into what those exact costs are, but the tangible savings. Same with decals. And so our reduction strategies with high performing clients, I do think yield greater savings than it may initially seem. And another piece, this is a delicate topic and something that MeetGreen is still kind of finding its position on. So I'm just floating it out there. I'm not trying to officially state our position on it. Is the idea of a sustainability sponsorship.
Right.
If these costs are getting amped up and passed along, maybe there's a way that there's a business case for getting recognized for that. And carbon offsets have sort of fallen out of favor.
Right.
Maybe they'll come back into favor. But waste is something we can all agree on. And so there's different ways that we might be able to do this. We've had a few proofs of concept, but I think it's still emerging. I think there's something here, but just like with putting that caveat on a report, it's like they don't own the results. They don't own this process. There's sort of a conversation that needs to occur and a few understandings that need to be established. But I think that might be a way, if we're afraid of upcharges, possibly get around that, is to a more modern look at what a sustainability sponsorship could look like.
Right. Yeah. I feel like you almost need to start with, different types of events where sustainability is really kind of a focus of that particular event and a sponsorship kind of makes sense. I think there are a lot of events that, really just don't care about sustainability. And if their event team is doing some sustainability stuff, great. But that might make it harder to find a sponsorship for those kinds of things. But I think you're right, though, that, I think there are opportunities there. And even just to come back to some of your points around, making the business case, the whole point of reducing and looking to move your costs around. So eliminating carpet, for example, or going back to one of our basics of eliminating bottled water. Find ways where you can actually reduce cost so that you can pay for things that you may want to do that might cost a little bit more and might be a way of mitigating some of these upcharges that you're seeing from venues and and agencies and whatnot that are trying to push sustainability as a revenue stream.
Yeah, one of the things I like to say is minimalism is hip. And
Yeah.
I really do think that that's true. I mean, when I go to an event that is fairly minimal, it feels better in a lot of ways. You have more interactions with people. There's not as much stuff around. Marie Kondo would agree. I think that you just like have more brain space when it's not as cluttered. And of course, that has monetary and environmental benefits.
Yeah. So we're kind of coming to the end of our time, so I just wanted to kind of wrap up a little bit. And this episode is actually our September episode of Patio Perspectives, and I know that IMEX America is coming up, Eric, and you're feverishly working on that. And I think, a lot of people who are watching this might be going to IMEX. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything that you could talk about that people should look for in terms of like sustainability being activated in interesting and new ways at IMEX, and or just, how your feelings about, kind of like the continuous improvement that IMEX has been making over the years.
Yeah. One of the things we're really excited about for IMEX this year is exporting our waste to this new Republic Services Polymer Center.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping to take a tour of it with the recycling manager at Mandalay Bay. And so it's a new kind of technology. And this technology is actually serving their Frankfurt event as well. But it renders a more limited set of plastics, 1, 2, and 5, into what looks like a pellet.
Mm.
And my term, not Republic's, but like a universal feedstock that's a little bit more easily able to be rendered and molded into another plastic product. So it actually keeps the material in use longer and gives us greater confidence that the plastics that we do send there are being recycled. Particularly number one, PET. I think the narrative is changing there in terms of its material life extending and needing less enrichment. So stay tuned on that front. And one just kind of key thing that I really respect about the IMEX program is the continuity that they tend to give to sustainability. And I think it plays out in the long term. They're in it for the right reason. Because in the beginning I was talking about body, mind, and spirit, kind of like relating it to, I do think that these are like life's great questions and circumstances. Got to keep at it. Like you're going to have some good years, some bad years. Some people are going to be missing. Like your team's going to change, the client side, the venue side,
right?
And just coming in for there are quick wins, but it's a slog. And I can tell you that even in 2024, after working for numerous years in this program, it still feels just as challenging.
Right.
Because we're trying to get wins on the margin. There things like little decals in windows we've trimmed down. We haven't eliminated them. Still an event. So I think that kind of long-term approach, like if for those to keep the flame going on there, is really important. And lastly, I'll just mention one of your corporate goals that you articulated at Oracle was about having fun. And I think that's threatening to be lost in the modern age of intense scrutiny. So as important as our science-based targets are, having fun and kind of keeping going is also just, to me, really, really important. And so it helps our teams take that long-term approach if they're being fed by getting engaged in that. So I wanted to share.
Aaron, anything in particular that you're working on that you think is kind of like innovative and interesting that people might want to hear about?
I mean, I would be remiss if during a webinar I didn't discuss one particular thing, which is the relationship between waste diversion and total waste. And it's a burgeoning kind of topic and expansion of the typical diversion rate for us. We want to start including things that are a waste reduction, like rentals, things that you're reusing year over year, and really giving people credit for the things that they're doing, not just how they're diverting their waste, but their total waste that they're producing there, and just kind of modernizing that number, I think is really important. And we're starting to see folks that their waste diversion is going down, but their sustainability program is really improving. That's kind of the new frontier for the clients that I'm working with as they're getting more sustainable, to make sure that the knowledge base around that is explained.
Right. Okay, well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners will, take the opportunity to listen to this and take on some of the things that we've talked about, or go to the MeetGreen website and see what the offerings might be, as well as other consultants that are out there. There's so much resources available now, on the web, and you don't always have to hire a sustainability consultant, but I will tell you that if you're doing a big event, it can be very, very productive and very make you much more efficient from an event planning perspective. So Eric and Aaron, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. And, just as a reminder, Patio Perspectives is our monthly web podcast. And so stay tuned, and we will be publishing these to our YouTube channel. And so until next time, this is your host, Paul Salinger, signing off. Thanks so much.